Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be diving into some really interesting stuff. I think it's going to be a really good one.
I'm excited for this.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at a connection between the book 1984 and a political project called Project 2025.
Right.
You know, 1984 is that, that book by George Orwell about...
Classic.
Yeah, the totalitarian state.
Yeah, it's a classic dystopian novel.
Totally controls people's lives.
Big brother.
Big brother.
Watching you.
Watching you.
All the time.
And Project 2025 is this set of policy proposals that's been getting some attention lately.
It has, yeah. It's been causing a lot of buzz.
Yeah, and what we're going to be doing is looking at how some of the ideas and concerns from the book, especially, stuff about like surveillance and control and even manipulating information, seem to echo in some of the things that are laid out in Project 2025.
Yeah, those are some of the big themes in 1984, right?
Yeah.
Control, surveillance, manipulation of information.
Right. And we see that reflected in this project.
Well, to give a little more background for listeners who might not be familiar with it, Project 2025 is it's a set of proposals put out by a conservative think tank.
Right.
And the goal of it is to essentially reorient the federal government, like literally their words, if a new administration takes over.
Oh, okay.
And it's the scope of the project that is really what's drawing these comparisons to 1984, because it goes into everything.
Oh, yeah.
It talks about education, healthcare, environmental regulations, and even how the federal workforce itself is structured.
Oh, so it's pretty far-reaching.
Yeah. Extremely far-reaching.
Okay. Well, so let's get into it.
Yeah, let's unpack it.
Let's unpack this thing.
I love that. Let's unpack it.
Yeah, and I want to start with this idea of, like Big Brother.
Okay.
And this feeling of always being watched.
Sure.
Do you remember that part in the book where Winston thinks he's found like a private little spot in Mr. Charrington's shop?
Yes.
And then it turns out there's a telescreen.
Yeah.
Hidden behind the picture.
Right behind this seemingly innocent picture.
Right.
Chilling.
Still chilling. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
you're never safe.
You're never safe.
You're never truly alone.
Yeah. And that's what brings us to one of the most talked about parts of Project 2025.
Okay.
It's this proposal to replace people who work for the federal government, who are nonpartisan, with people who are loyal to the administration.
This is a big one.
It's a big one, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, wait a minute.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, if we about to go into a world where to get a government job, it's about who you're loyal to.
Right, political allegiance.
Right, not if you can actually do the job.
Exactly.
Which is, a little bit like...
a huge concern.
A little concerning, right?
Yeah.
And this is what critics are bringing up, this idea that this kind of change could make people who work for the government really afraid.
Yeah, a climate of fear.
Yeah.
Where you don't want to speak out.
Right.
You don't want to say anything.
You don't want to dissent.
Right, because you could lose your job.
Right, you're going to lose your job.
Exactly. And it starts to feel a little bit like, Winston's world.
Oh, yeah.
Or even like a private thought that you write down in your diary.
Right.
Could be considered an act of rebellion.
Which is really scary to think about.
It is.
Because in 1984, like, Winston just writing down with Big Brother.
It's just that,
in his own diary was a huge risk.
Exactly.
And then when you look at Project 2025's proposal to give ideologically based tests to people who work for the government, it's kind of like, oh, God.
It's troubling.
It's troubling, right?
Yeah.
So now we're not just talking about replacing people.
Right.
We're talking about potentially, like...
shaping their thoughts.
Yeah, shaping the thoughts and beliefs.
And the beliefs.
Of the people who work for the government.
It's a pretty intense thought, right?
Yeah, because think about it. Like, what if your job security depended on not how good you are at your job, but your beliefs?
Yeah.
It's like, what happens to dissent in that kind of environment?
Does it get stifled?
Right. Does it just go underground?
Yeah.
And do we just end up with a government that's just like...
an echo chamber?
An echo chamber for one ideology?
That's the concern. And it's a very real concern. And I think it's important to note that there are, people who are arguing both sides of this.
Right.
There are people who say that a government that's ideologically aligned would be more efficient and that it would be, able to get things done more quickly. And there are people who say that this is a threat to the idea of a civil service that is diverse and impartial.
Right.
And this is a debate that has been going on for a long time.
Yep.
And it's not going away anytime soon.
So we've got...
It's a deep one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got potential parallels in how things are watched and controlled.
Yep.
And now in ideology and thought.
Yeah.
What's next? Are they going to try to rewrite history like in 1984?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. So, Winston worked at the Ministry of Truth, right?
Right.
And his whole job was rewriting history to make the party look good.
Right, like getting rid of the bad stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Creating a story that helped them stay in control.
And it really makes you think.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if you can't even trust history?
That's right. What happens when you can't trust what you're reading or what you're seeing?
Right. It's all about controlling the narrative, right?
It is. It's about shaping how people see the world and how they understand it.
And that's where the connection to Project 2025 gets really interesting.
Yeah. It starts to make you think a little bit.
Okay, so you're not saying that Project 2025 wants to, like, literally rewrite history.
No, not in that literal sense. Okay. But there are definitely some concerns about how some of the proposals could affect the way information is given out, especially when it comes to things like education or government data.
So, like, what kind of proposals?
So, for example, there's this idea of rethinking how history is taught in schools, focusing on something they're calling patriotic education.
Okay.
And a lot of people are worried that this could lead to kind of like a whitewashed version of history where you downplay or even just leave out certain events or viewpoints.
Right, if they don't fit with this patriotic narrative.
Exactly, if it doesn't fit with the narrative they want to push.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like that slogan.
Oh, yeah.
From 1984,
Who controls the past?
Who controls the past controls the future.
Who controls the present controls the past. Like, it's all about shaping how people see the world.
Yeah, and controlling how they understand it.
And it's not just about education, is it?
No, it's not just education.
Yeah.
Project 2025 also talks about having more control over government data, which could mean making it harder for people to access certain information.
Right.
Or even changing how that information is presented to the public.
So it's not exactly like rewriting history, but it's kind of like controlling what information people get and how it's all framed.
Exactly. And that's where it starts to feel a little bit like 1984.
Oh, yeah. Like how?
Remember the idea of doublethink?
Oh, yeah, doublethink.
Where you can believe two opposite things at the same time.
Right.
And accept them both as true.
Yeah, it's like mind-blowing.
It is, yeah.
And really scary.
Yeah.
It's like when they say in the book, war is peace.
Yeah.
War is peace.
Freedom is slavery.
Freedom is slavery. It's like, what?
Yeah.
How can those things...
How can you possibly believe?
Yeah.
But of course, Project 2025 isn't saying those exact things.
Okay.
But the worry is that by controlling the information, by shaping that narrative, you could end up with something similar.
Right.
Like a kind of doublethink, where people are only given a version of reality that fits a certain agenda.
Wow. Okay.
So,
it's a little scary, right?
Yeah, it's a little scary.
Yeah.
So we've talked about controlling the narrative, but 1984 also talks about restricting personal freedom.
It does. Yeah.
So does Project 2025.
Go there.
Yeah.
Well, it's not quite as straightforward as that.
Okay.
But there are some proposals in there that have raised concerns about how they could affect individual liberties, particularly in the areas of labor and social safety nets.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Sure.
What are we talking about specifically?
Okay, so for one thing, Project 2025 includes this idea of maybe rolling back some of the rules about when workers are eligible for overtime pay.
Oh.
And some people are saying that this could mean that people end up working longer hours for less money.
Yeah.
Basically giving employers more control over their employees' time.
It's kind of like those scenes in the book.
It is a little bit, yeah.
Where everyone's always working and tired.
Exhausted. Yeah. And there's no time for anything but serving the party.
Right.
Obviously, it's a different situation in the real world.
Yeah, of course.
But that theme of control over people's time and labor is definitely there.
And it's not just work, is it?
No, it goes beyond that.
Right.
There are also things in Project 2025 that deal with access to social safety net programs.
Right, like what kind of programs?
So, for example, there are some ideas about making the rules stricter for things like SNP, which is the food stamps program.
Right.
And that could mean that people who really need those benefits might not be able to get them.
And in 1984, the party controlled everything.
Right.
The food, the information.
Yeah, everything.
It was all about
keeping people dependent.
Yeah, keeping people dependent.
Yeah, under their control.
And under their control.
So, of course, it's not the same situation here, but it does make you wonder,
right,
could these restrictions on social safety nets create a kind of similar dynamic?
Right.
Where people become more reliant on the government for their basic needs, and maybe that makes them more open to being controlled.
Okay, so we've got...
It's something to think about.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
So we've got possible parallels in surveillance, in the control of information, and now in the potential restriction of personal freedom.
That's right.
What else can we learn from Project 2025 through this lens of 1984?
It's pretty amazing how much we found in Project 2025 that reminds us of 1984.
Yeah, it is.
Especially when we think about control and maybe even individual liberties starting to disappear.
Yeah, it is unsettling.
It is.
But there's something else about 1984 that's been on my mind.
Okay.
It's that feeling of hopelessness.
Yeah.
You know, that feeling that the system is so big and powerful that there's just no point in fighting back.
Yeah, like resistance is futile.
Exactly.
That's one of the things Orwell does so well.
Right.
He creates this sense that the party has just totally crushed the human spirit.
Right. And it makes me think about that scene.
Yeah.
Where Winston finally gets to read Goldstein's book.
Oh, yeah.
The one that explains...
the forbidden text.
Yeah, the truth about how the party keeps its power.
Right.
And do you remember what it says about the proles?
Yeah, the working class.
The working class.
Yeah.
It basically says that they're the ones who could actually overthrow the party.
Right. They have the power.
They have the power, but they're too busy just trying to survive.
Right. They're too distracted.
They're too distracted.
By their daily struggles.
Right.
To even realize how much power they have.
Right. And it makes you wonder, as we're looking at Project 2025, and how it could affect so many parts of our society.
Right.
Who are the proles in this situation?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, who are the people who would be hit the hardest by these proposals?
Right. Who is most vulnerable?
But who might not even know or have the resources to fight back.
Right. And that's something we really need to think about.
Yeah, because it's easy to get caught up in all the intellectual debate about how Project 2025 is like 1984.
Right.
But we can't forget that these proposals, if they actually happen, they would affect real people.
They would have real consequences.
Real consequences, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to not just look at the proposals themselves,
right,
but also to think about who benefits from them,
right,
and who might be left behind.
It's about understanding how power can shift,
right,
and how that can end up marginalizing certain groups.
Yeah. Okay, so we've gone from...
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot to think about.
It is.
We've gone from surveillance and controlling information to potentially losing some of our freedoms.
Right.
And now we're talking about who might be the most vulnerable.
Exactly. It's heavy stuff.
It is, and it shows just how relevant 1984 still is.
Right.
It's not just a story about a dystopian future.
Yeah.
It's a warning about how power can corrupt.
Right.
How systems can dehumanize people.
Yeah.
And how we can sometimes be complicit in our own oppression.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this feeling of like, what do we do?
Yeah.
If 1984 is a warning, what can we learn from it?
Right.
To make sure we don't end up...
Yeah, how do we safeguard?
Yeah, how do you safeguard our own future?
Our own future, right?
I think the biggest lesson is to be aware of how these dystopian themes can show up in our own world, even in small ways.
Right.
It's about being vigilant, asking questions, and not taking our freedoms for granted.
Because it's not about being scared.
Right.
Or thinking that Project 2025 is going to turn us into Oceania tomorrow.
Exactly.
It's about understanding what's at stake, what could happen because of these policies.
Right. What are the consequences?
Yeah. And having real conversations.
Yeah. Having those thoughtful,
informed conversations.
Informed discussions.
About where we want our society to go.
Exactly.
So for everyone listening out there. Keep exploring these ideas.
Keep thinking about it.
Read 1984.
Read 1984.
Look into Project 2025.
Yeah, do your own research.
Yeah. And most importantly, stay engaged. Because the best way to avoid a dystopian future is to be aware
and informed
and involved in shaping the world we want to live in.
Absolutely.